Hey Nick, it's Mrs. Wallace. How are you? I just thought I would do this quick video just to kind of go over some of the comments on the DBQ. One of the things you can do is you can actually title your DBQ. So you might, decide maybe there's something that you want to go for as a title. It could be, a look at the Renaissance, or it could be something really specific that relates to your argument. The other thing is in your first paragraph. So I'm just going to go like paragraph by paragraph. And there's a few things that I'm going to point out, just a few things that we can work on, and we can do a little bit at a time. And, kind of just recognize in a sense that, editing your own work is a really good way to just kind of practice writing. And it's a way of just keep coming back to the same written work, and you can just change things, and it gives you practice, with that skill. So you start out with a sentence that says, during the time of the Renaissance, there were a lot of developments in text from previous errors. Because of this, there were changes in a lot of things that were thought about by an individual, ranging from religious, physical beliefs to different ways of effective ruling of a prince to education and body. So what I'm going to suggest is some of the language that you're using is broad. Okay, what I mean by that is during the time of the Renaissance could be stated by saying something like, your first sentence could be specific. The European Renaissance occurred between the years 1350 and 1550 CE. Okay, so you're not necessarily kind of saying to your reader, when the Renaissance happened at this kind of time, you're suggesting, the Renaissance occurred in Europe at this point in time. So whenever writing in history, try to put your finger on place and time. And then you also say there were a lot of developments in text from previous eras, okay? And you're right. What makes the Renaissance is an infusion of texts from a few different places. And these are texts that are older texts. So a way to make that really specific would be something like, something that began the Renaissance was the infusion of classical texts, texts from ancient Greece and ancient Rome that had not necessarily been seen before in Europe in such large numbers become available to Europeans, okay? So something like that tells your reader not only that texts were available, but the texts were certain kinds of texts that were written during the ancient Roman and ancient Greek periods. Sometimes were written by philosophers, sometimes, written by, playwrights, a variety of different people. And some of those sources were also added to, for example, by Islamic scholars. So some of these sources were translated in the Middle Ages by Islamic scholars, and then kind of came to Europe through Spain, which was part of the Islamic Empire. So when you describe some of that, it does a few things in your essay. It not only takes a sentence like, there were a lot of developments in text, and makes it a little bit more specific, but it also adds some good background to your paragraph. So you can actually go into the McKay book and pull some content from the McKay book about this transition from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, and you can describe the beginnings of this philosophy of humanism that come from this blending of older classical texts and new ideas, okay? So it's not that you're incorrect with the idea of what you're putting into the first paragraph. It's just that you want to use your language to be as specific as possible, even if you have to go into a source, a textbook source, to pull from that source, okay? You don't want your whole paragraph to be quoted from a textbook, but you can use some of the content, and it'll help you word some of the specific detail, okay? When you get to your thesis, I think it's interesting that you're talking about a few things. You actually are talking about people are thinking about the role of the individual differently. So something that changes as a result of the infusion of these classical texts, people get reminded about the role of the individual and start to see themselves, become self-aware as individuals, okay? You can also suggest, as a result of people taking on new roles as individuals, people decide to make improvements to life on Earth. Okay, so this is a pivot away from having focus entirely on like a religious afterlife. This is going to be a pivot on the human experience on Earth. And so ways to improve this would be to improve government and also to improve oneself through education. And I'm kind of looking at what you have in your essay. You have a paragraph about education and how that was really important during the Renaissance. You also have a paragraph about how some people during the Renaissance became what's called civic humanists, and they tried to improve the government, right? Make it better. They didn't all do it in the same way, but people try to make it better. So you could keep your paragraphs about the bettering of society, but make that your thesis. You know, as a result of these new classical texts, people during the Renaissance started to better society, or started to take, initiatives to better society. One way we see this societal improvement is through changes in education. Another way we see societal improvement is through changes to government, okay? It's actually a very good argument because now you can launch into those like sub-arguments and you have an organization to the essay that's good. What you need is a little bit more clear language of what your points are, connecting that to a thesis, because if you say things are thought about by an individual, ranging from religious, physical beliefs, it's not clear exactly what you mean by that, okay? But if you kind of wrap that section of your thesis around, with this transition from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, we see a society that's intent on improving the human condition. And you're noting in the essay 2 ways to do that: education and improving the government. That becomes what your argument really is, okay? Your whole thesis is about these particular types of improvements that happened during the Renaissance, and then in each of the paragraphs, one on education and one on government, you want to talk about those particular things. And the second thing I'll note is for the first paragraph, you want to start your paragraph point very clearly and note the point of the whole paragraph. So for your second paragraph, because this is a paragraph where you're talking about the individual, rather than saying classical texts were greatly developed, what you want to say is classical text helped to make individuals more aware of the human experience and the importance, if you will, of their time on Earth. They started to kind of consider, I should really focus on the here and now and not worry about what happens to my soul later on. Maybe that's still important, but the life on Earth maybe could be bettered, and it's worth paying attention to that. And you use the quote from John Hale, which is fine. You can use that. You might shorten that quote and spend a little bit more time in that paragraph in your voice, okay? You might use the plague here as an example of something that maybe creates some of the self-awareness. It's not only classical texts, it's also the shift in thinking that maybe people after, just like we're all different as a result of a pandemic, our priorities maybe change. Maybe we spend time a little differently now than we did a few years ago. The plague may have also had an impact. So that's something that you could put into this paragraph, or you could focus on what are reasons or examples you could use that makes you say, I know that people were behaving more as individuals or focusing on life on Earth, right? And one way to do this is by describing some of the changes in art of the period. There's much more of a focus on making things relative to the human experience. Even art that has religious content is using human figures. And there's a lot more focus on human figures. The Mona Lisa is an example of that, okay? Even in The Last Supper, which is a religious work of art by Leonardo, there is an emphasis on the characters in the painting being portrayed as human and flawed, people who are making mistakes, arguably, in the religious story of things, okay? So what I would recommend doing is work some more on your introduction, add some background information, and work on using language to focus your thesis a little bit more around that idea of the individual and this role of, or this like kind of idea of improvement in terms of the government and education, and then work on the first body paragraph. Put a point in the beginning of your paragraph, keep some of the John Hale quote, take some of it out because it's too long, and we need more of your voice in this. The Hale quote isn't enough to hold the paragraph, so you need to work some more in this paragraph with your voice, and I would link the Hale paragraph to some other pieces of evidence, okay? If you want to work on it together, stop by and we can do it. But I say we kind of work on those two paragraphs and then we can hit the next one or so. I hope that that helps. I will see you in class. Most of what I have as a suggestion is like for the rest of the paragraphs too, very similar. A little smaller on some of the quotes. So your Machiavelli quote could be shorter and you could add another example to that paragraph. So you not only have Machiavelli, but maybe there's another example of this interest in improvement. And the Medici family is a good example because they use a great deal of wealth to try to improve the city of Florence, in some cases with art, in some cases with architecture. There is kind of a spirit of improvement going on in the Renaissance, even though it's not affecting everybody and people are improving things in different ways. It doesn't always look the same. That is a interesting argument, okay? So the depth of the argument is good. You just want to make it clear, okay? Be well. I'll see you in class.